What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We are here at last, the final 2 episodes of Love featuring Marriage and Divorce. I have heard some people saying that there will be a season 2, so I guess we have at least made it to the end of season 1 anyways. So quick disclaimer, I really want to dedicate as much time as possible to my overall thoughts on this show as a whole, so in the interest of that, these last 2 episode recaps will be super reductive, very brief, and I'll just be sticking with what I think is very important to the overall story, and maybe some random moments that I thought were funny or interesting as well. So sorry to all you guys that enjoyed my play-by-play commentary. I love you guys, but I think it's just really important that we get a lot of time to talk about the ending and how we feel about it. All right, let's get right into episode 15. So we pick up right where we left off with Ga-bin and Hae-ryun, and he ends up passing on the tea at her place invitation. What a gentleman. What a great guy. So then he's about to leave, but then she comes back and asks him if she can drive his car and if they can go somewhere. And she takes him to the spot where she walks a lot and sits him down and sings for him. Basically puts on a performance for him. It seems like this moment was triggered by the fact that he said before that he's become a fan of hers, and she seems to have this kind of need or obsession with performance and having an audience, and maybe a need of validation through that. Okay, so then we see Amy and Yu Shin. They're riding horses, and then they get done riding, and then they're leaving, but then they run into the doctor. There's a bit of a weird moment when the doctor sees Amy, because it's not Yu Shin's wife, but Yu Shin quickly comes up with the story that she is his cousin from the US. And the doc's like, okay, cool. But when they're walking away, it's pretty obvious he's a little suspicious. I mean, shit, even the horse is looking pretty suspicious. And then we get a little of Dongmi swimming with you. Okay, yeah, we're gonna skip that shit. All right, then we get a scene with Sa-hyun, who ends up going to Songwon's place because he wants to open her wine bottle, if you know what I mean. And they keep talking about that night Sa-hyun and Hae-ryun fought, and we get another mini flashback where they fight at home, and it's pretty bad. Some pretty bad stuff being said. And it even ends in Hae-ryun herself suggesting a divorce, which is interesting to find out that she was the first to bring that up. So Songwon is still trying to help Sa-hyun out with this whole dilemma. She even makes an excuse for Hae-ryun and says, hey, we girls get really mad when we're hungry and we aren't getting food. Okay. Anyways, she advises him to just work things out, basically put his ego aside and just be the first to say sorry and be willing to kneel in front of her and beg. And Sa-hyun's response to all of this advice is to ask Songwon to have dinner with him tomorrow. Okay. All right, then we get Mr. So with a major flex, gets the 3 wives a whole bunch of caviar just because, you know, fuck it, why not? And they're like, oh shit. And they go immediately to sit down at a cafe in order to gossip about him. They plan to get him drunk so that they can get him to talk more about himself and his backstory. And as it's been throughout this flashback as well as back in the present, Hae-ryun is definitely crushing on Mr. So. But honestly, I would like to find out more about him too, so yeah, let's do this. Definitely interested to see what happens there. Alright, so another scene I think is worth going over and discussing is when Sa-hyun and Songwon have dinner again. There's this moment where Sa-hyun defines their relationship by saying he doesn't want to define their relationship. He doesn't want to be like friends or like lovers or like brother and sister or parent and child. He just wants to be, quote, like Song-hyun and Xie-shin. I don't know, the Chinese versions of their names. Sorry about that incredibly awful butchering of that pronunciation. So his reasoning is that all conventional relationships eventually end or break up. Therefore, if they never label or define their relationship, it won't have to end. He wants to be as close as possible without defining what they have. He even says he wants to grow old with her like this. It's a very interesting take on the whole affair thing, sort of like the ultimate level you can achieve in emotional cheating. the highest rank possible. So the thing is, it's a nice thought, but I can't see that ending well. Getting that attached and that emotionally invested in someone else, it's only going to lead to some kind of need to define the relationship, or it's going to end just badly and in a mess. But I do think it's a very interesting thing that he brings up because it points to a larger theme that this show is trying to cover. Again, I'll get to that more at the end of the video. So another scene where I think we get some insight into one of the other affair relationships is when Hae-ryun goes to Ga-bin's place for dinner with that Jin-ah lady. There's another revealing moment, this time for Ga-bin's character, and it's pretty much what I'm sure a lot of us guessed already and what's hinted at in the first part of this episode. Basically that Ga-bin has had her heart broken by Mr. So's stepbrother, Two-Face. He was basically a player and didn't treat her right, and perhaps maybe she's had a lot of guys like this in her life. So I guess the narrative is that now she's looking for somebody safe, somebody reliable, someone respectful that will treat her right and maybe even worship her as a fan. So of course later on in the evening the other lady has to leave. She gets a call from her family, her son's nose is bleeding or something, and the two of them, Hae-ryun and Ga-bin, get some alone time. So Hae-ryun was there in the first place to fix Ga-bin's speakers, and he asks her questions and tells her this is how it broke. And there's a fairly obvious small metaphor inserted into this scene where the speakers and the damage to it are kind of like Ga-bin and her heart. So he keeps working on fixing the speakers, which are going to take a couple hours, and then the dramatic music comes out of nowhere, and Ga-bin says to Hae-ryun, "Professor, can you hold me for a moment?" And Hae-ryun looks back at her like, "You're goddamn right, I'll hold you. I will hold the shit out of you." And yeah, here we go again, guys. Alright, that's it for this episode. Again, I told you, short recaps, right? So this was a pretty slow episode, which kind of surprised me since it feels like a lot is being left to be wrapped up in the last episode, but that could also be, again, a further indication that there is going to be a season 2 and that a lot of the stuff that we see as necessary to be wrapped up by the end of this season is actually going to be stretched out into another. The preview for the last episode looks pretty scandalous, as well it should, because goddammit, we need some action. I need some explosions, some chaos, some disaster, some climax. Not that kind of climax necessarily, but you know what I mean, storytelling wise. So let me just stop talking. Let's get right into this final episode recap. Alright guys, we made it. Episode 16, the last episode of Season 1. Let's get to it. So we get right back to Ga-bin and Hae-ryun, and Ga-bin is all of a sudden just coming on real strong. I was waiting to see what side she was gonna fall on. Is she gonna be more Song-won or more Amy? And yeah, she's definitely on the Amy side, unfortunately. She asks him, "Are you happy in your marriage? Is your wife your ideal type? Don't you want another chance at love? Can I have a place in your heart? Will you hold me?" And he basically rejects her, is like, this isn't appropriate. He gets up to go, but of course she stumbles and they embrace, and he holds her and she says, "I can feel your warmth." Oh god, guys, this writing sometimes, I don't even know. Alright, let's keep on moving. I know I said I wasn't gonna cover every little scene, but oh my god, I got so triggered during this next scene where Seon does her best to dress up. She really wants to look good. She's meeting up with the other two wives, and when she arrives, she has this fantasy of them saying, "Hey, you look so great. I didn't even recognize you." And then, of course, when she actually goes in and sees them, they don't even notice. And yeah, my heart just broke. She even tries to fish for a compliment from them, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, you know, the lights will save you." Oh my god, no, Seon, you do not say that to yourself. You look great. And thank god Hyung-ji, her daughter, comes through and saves the day right after that when she says that her mom looks great. At least somebody's acknowledging that. She kind of gets a little revenge right after that too, because when they meet up with Mr. So for the dinner date, Mr. So gives her this compliment and mistakes her for her younger sister or something. Oh, also, I loved that scene. Everybody was getting really tipsy and Hae-ryun was sloppy and jealous, and I loved it. Even Sehun gets a little tipsy and says some pretty funny stuff. I was actually laughing out loud at that part. Great scene. Okay, let's see what... Nope. I am not watching this. Go away. All right. Let's see what's next. God damn it. No. Not watching this either. Okay, next scene I want to touch on is Ga-bin seeming to think twice about how forward she was before with Hae-ryun, and she calls him and tells him she wants to quit teaching after this semester. And I was thinking, okay, the subtext here is she's quitting her job as the professor, and that's basically the same as her saying, hey, I don't want to keep pursuing this relationship with you. She's rethinking things, and Hae-ryun seems to be crushed. And at this time I was thinking, okay, well, I know they end up having an affair, I guess, so maybe he ran after her. Of course, we'll have more on that in a moment. But next big scene is the showdown between Sa-hyun and Song-won. He goes to see her at a hotel in Gangneung. Sorry about the pronunciation as usual. They have dinner and then they walk on the beach afterwards, and she's still trying to give him advice for Hae-ryun, but he just comes out and says, fuck it, I'm gonna end my marriage, I'm getting a divorce. She's like, no, just try to follow my advice. And he's like, not this time. So she tells him, all right, well then come up and have some tea. And yeah, it seems like we're about to get down to the nitty-gritty here. So they go back to her room and talk, and she's still trying to convince him to change his mind. Meanwhile, he's busy trying to confess to her and saying, let me just sort this out with Hae-ryun and I'll officially propose to you after. And damn, man, what happened to, like, let's not define our relationship? I guess we're just throwing that right out the window, right? And she's like, nah, bro, chill out. And Sa-hyun is just not trying to hear it. He's like, I don't care, I'm getting a divorce. She's like, don't do it just for me. And he's like, it's not just for you, it's for other reasons too. And then she's like, okay, if you're gonna do this, then you have to know the real me. And I'm thinking, okay, she's about to drop this huge secret that changes everything. Is she really a man? Does she have 5 belly buttons? Is she a secret agent undercover? But no, what she really means is that they have to get down to business first so he can see her for what she really is. So her rationale is that get to know the real me by seeing me completely vulnerable and exposed, and then forget your feelings for me? Come on, really? You have to know the real me by having sex with me, but at the same time, I'm trying to convince you not to end your marriage? The idea is that he's gonna sleep with you, and then that's gonna help him make his feelings go away? That makes literally no sense. What the fuck? And so yeah, then they get down to business. They punch the fart bucket with the lampshade or whatever the fuck I said before. He goes back home, Sa-hyun does, and he's all ready to tell Hae-ryun about the divorce, but then it turns out her dad has cancer, and damn, that sucks. She asks where he's been, and he kind of avoids the question, but she's like, where'd you sleep? And he's like, I hardly slept at all. My boy was putting in that work. But fuck all that, because then we get an even crazier showdown between husband and mistress with Ga-bin and Hae-ryun. Holy shit. Wow, this scene. Wow. So they go out to eat, and she reveals that the reason she quit her job as a teacher is so that she can ask Hae-ryun if it's okay if she can use him to be her rebound so she can get over her ex-boyfriend. What the actual fuck? She literally comes right out and asks him if she can use him. She is even crazier than I thought, and she even has the nerve to say, yeah, I used to like bad boys, but I've matured now, so I seek someone kind. Oh, yeah, using a married man with kids who's way older than you as a rebound for your playboy ex-boyfriend. So mature. I mean, so woke. Holy shit, Amy, look out, because here comes Ga-bin making a late push for craziest mistress of them all. What the fuck, guys? So Hae-ryun tries to friend zone her at first, and then she's like, I want to talk to you all night. That's what it feels like I want to do. But talking isn't all I want to do. And then she says she wants to, like, touch him, but we know goddamn well what she means. Oh, and then there's also the fact that all of this is going on. He's having this conversation with Ga-bin while he's missing his daughter's birthday. And then in the next scene, yes, we get confirmation. They definitely prodded the lampshade with the oyster rocket whatever. So after this, Ga-bin is saying similar stuff to what Amy said to Yushin. Oh, I don't care about our arrangement. I don't want much from you. I just want to see you every now and then, and I'll be satisfied. And right, we'll see how that works out in season 2. So we're pretty much at the end of the episode, but then we get one final twist at the end. It turns out that the doctor that we've been seeing this whole time, talking with Yushin, going riding, giving everybody herbal medicine, turns out he's Amy's father. Holy shit. I guess? I mean, it was shocking, and I didn't see it coming, but it also seemed really random. Like, oh, okay. We find this out because Amy's mom comes to Korea and then visits him at his office. And it seems like she must have had an affair with the doctor a while back. Maybe it wasn't an affair, maybe he wasn't married then, we don't know for sure. He definitely didn't know that she kept the baby. He finds out he has a daughter, and I mean, it doesn't affect that much. It's a pretty crazy twist and pretty interesting, but it doesn't really affect too much with the plot, except I guess that the doctor may find out at some point that his colleague, his friend Yushin, is banging his daughter, so nice. All right, guys, that's it for this episode recap and for season 1 of Love Featuring Marriage and Divorce. What a journey, guys. Thank you so much once again for joining me and watching it with me. I have enjoyed this so much, and I hope you did too. And of course, there is a message from the show itself at the end of episode 16 saying to look forward to season 2. It will exceed your expectations. I mean, at this point, I'm not even sure what my expectations are anymore. All right, so let's get into my final thoughts about this show. This is completely raw and uncut. I have had no time to process. I finished the show. I finished editing and putting the video in for the recap, and I went right to Google Docs and started writing. Also, apologies in advance. In the interest of getting this video up as fast as possible, I'm not going to do as much editing with my voice in terms of editing out the breathing, so I hope it's not too unbearable. Also, for those of you who have not seen my other videos and have just been watching this series and hearing me crack jokes the entire time and just basically recap what happened, I am definitely going to be going into full analysis mode here. Playtime's over. I'm about to get serious. All right, so here we are at the end. And I think the thing to do now is try and process on the fly what I've just watched. I'm just gonna go with a kind of stream of consciousness rant here and hope that I give you at least some kind of worthwhile analysis that you can find some value in. Okay, so first, what did I think of the show? Well, I think I should first provide some context. I chose to make this video series and chose this show pretty much solely off of the fact that it was a new show that was about to come out and it would be airing episodes weekly on Netflix. I wanted to try a new format for my reviews, and this looked the most interesting out of the 3 upcoming shows that I found. From the very first weekend of watching episodes 1 and 2, it was pretty obvious, at least for me, that this was going to be a very soapy drama. And I kind of made my peace with that early on. I knew it was going to get cheesy, melodramatic, and scandalous, and I was okay with that. I saw that over these past weeks, a lot of you had trouble with the format of the show, specifically how the 2 halves were structured, and while I agree with a lot of the specific criticisms I saw, for me, I also feel like we were all warned from the very start how this was gonna go. The first scene with the random 2 ladies having it out in the middle of a radio broadcast setup, complete with audience, was the blueprint for the entire show. One woman tells her story about how the other is a homewrecker and a bad person, and she calls her out. We are all watching and we judge her right away. Then the other lady comes back with her own side of the story and it suddenly becomes more complex. Again, I said this in my first video for episodes 1 and 2, but real quick for those of you who didn't watch that, the whole point of this scene is to show how there are always 2 sides to a story. Also, the framing in this scene is such that it puts the whole situation in a box, geometrically framing it within that window we look at it through and socially framing it with an audience of people around it. This extends to a referencing of us as the audience watching the actual show through our own square framing of our laptops, phones, or TVs. as well as the personal framing of our own judgments and values. The reason I want to reiterate this is because I think the show not only warned us about how things would go, it was also sort of a prediction for how we'd react. And in this sense, I think it was incredibly successful. Every week I saw people in the comments saying how they hate this character, hated this husband, and how he cheated, how he's a terrible person, or the mistresses, how they're terrible and they hate them too. And I'm not saying anyone is wrong for saying these things, I'm just pointing out that this is exactly what the show set out to do. You are the person in the audience at the radio station during that scene who speaks out and feels the need to say something about the situation going on in front of them. Even though this was intentional by the show, it doesn't invalidate your negative experience of watching it. I agree with a lot of people that this show was tough to watch a lot of the time, but it's pretty clear from this first scene that this was intentional and was designed to make a larger point about how everyone judges others and brings their own associations and values to experiencing any given situation. But this also applies to how the second half of the show is structured. The narrative follows that microcosm in the beginning, just like the second lady stands up and tells her side. The second half is the other side of the story we see in the first half. And while we're here, I'll also add that I don't believe, as some of you were saying, and as I also thought at first, that the second half of the show is supposed to be the husband's side of the story. Think back again to this first scene where we don't actually see any husband there to represent his side at the radio station, just the wife and the mistress. Following this scene as the blueprint like we did for those other points, we can come to the realization that it's not the husband's story that the second half of the show is telling, it's the three mistresses. Now, whether the show did a good job in executing this is another story, but I think it's an important distinction to recognize for anyone trying to analyze the second half of the show and doing so with the belief that it is supposed to be for the men and from their side. So I just covered some pretty specific stuff about the writing, but as far as my overall general opinion of the writing, I think that the premise and framework of the show was great initially. 3 married couples, 3 different relationships at 3 different points in life, 3 different perspectives. The wives are all friends and talk together. Great. It creates this diegetic space for thematic development and social commentary. The husbands all might be cheating, but we don't know for sure or who with. Great. Some mystery added in. The show definitely had a very promising start. The thematic foundation of the show was also pretty promising, as I just went over with that first scene and all of the things that it foreshadows. The second half of the show was pretty ambitious, and while I do think it helps to realize the point of that second half and how it's structured, it still didn't take away from the fact that a lot of people, myself included, spent a good amount of time becoming bored and tired of it. I don't think that seeing the mistress's side of things was boring or unnecessary as an idea or a concept, and I was fine with it being the entire second half of the show. But it was the way it ended up being executed that I really had problems with. For one, I just had a really hard time believing the romance or connection between the mistresses and the husbands. I think the best job the show does is with Song-won and Sa-hyun. Aside from actually liking these two people or characters in a subjective way, I also felt like the situation and progression was the most believable. For the other two, I think the best way to describe it is that I felt the mistresses on their own, their backstories and the consequential effects it had on how they approach love were not the problem. I could get on board with how they had been hurt or damaged in the past. It's where the husbands come into the equation that I think the show fails to convince us to take the jump into believing how these affairs began and evolved. Why do these women have to fix their issues or find fulfillment with married men? Why is that the only way? A sub-theme in this show is the idea of family bonds, and the show makes such a point in letting us know that these 3 women are all wanting in that area, all of their family being far away. But again, was there no other way that this fulfillment could be found? These women are hardly ever seen talking to or interacting with anyone else besides the husbands they have affairs with. Could they also not find fulfillment in their careers, their passions, making other friends of the same sex, or even making friends, or finding romance with other men that aren't married. Again, I think back to my theory about these three early on, that they weren't actually mistresses but were just a mirror to the three wives and were just living their own lives free of the concept of marriage and relationships. Obviously, I was proven wrong in the fact that they weren't mistresses at all, but now that I've finished this season, I feel like I was right in a way, or could be, because it looks like, chronologically speaking, at the end, these women have ended their affairs with the three husbands, and as a result are way happier, and look to be doing exactly what I was just describing before. Finding fulfillment from other sources besides men, or rather married men representing the conventional idea of love and relationship that is marriage. On second thought, maybe the thematic reasoning for the whole affair dynamic is that the men being married serves as a symbol of family and success in forming those bonds, at least outwardly. And so that's the reason these women all find married men. They represent a family bond. They are part of one, have formed one, and that's what these women all want or are lacking. This makes some sense, right? It's not hard to understand from a thematic perspective. The problem is it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on a literal diegetic level. It's really hard to sit through and understand as a person. The show really tries to flesh out the relationships between husband and mistress with all of these scenes of them talking or eating or going places, but it just ends up coming across as vapid, not to mention incredibly tedious. I think thematically the show does a good job here, but the actual characters that we're supposed to see and believe as people, not as symbols for a commentary, don't really end up working that well. Let's go over some more of the thematic stuff. Like I went over briefly, one of the main themes of this show is an examination of relationships between people, how we define them, and the roles, expectations, and limitations we place within them. Think of the motif of each pair of mistress and husband having the same conversation about what to call each other, whether to use honorifics, nicknames, and so on. This is part of the construction of this theme. We can also think back to the framing of the first scene in the first episode. It's not just the framing of our judgment and values that we perceive things through, not just the meta commentary about our screens we watch the show through, it's also a visual representation of how we put our relationships in a box, by labeling them with names, assigning roles and limitations for each kind. Parent, child, husband, wife, brother, sister, boss, employee. Think of all the different types of relationships we see in this show, and the expectations and roles for each. Think of the conversation between Sa-hyun and Song-won where he mentions this. Think of all the mistresses and how they supposedly fall in love with the three husbands, but really they are attracted to what they see as a way to fill a space left empty by other relationships. Back again to the idea of framing of relationships in a box, throughout this show we see many shots of literal frames hanging on the walls of the characters' homes, showing a picture of the married couple or the family, whatever the case may be. These shots are often shown in the background while something is going down that challenges, contrasts, or seems to put stress on the perfect, idealized picture of what marriage or family should be. And I thought that was another thing the show did well in terms of detail and thematic construction. Okay, so lastly, I know it seems like I've just been defending this show the whole time, but I feel like ranting about all the bad stuff is low-hanging fruit, and I'm sure you guys will take care of that in the comments, and you all probably know what you don't like about it and why you don't like it. So please don't come away from this thinking I disagree with all of you that want to shit all over this show or even just fairly criticize it. I'm with you on so much of it. But I think the best thing I can do as the person making the video for you to watch, as a reviewer, is to make sure that we recognize what was done well, right alongside with what wasn't. This show is designed to make you upset. It wants to make you feel the way that you do, and maybe knowing this and understanding it a bit better will help you find a more nuanced opinion on the show and your experience watching it. And if you still hate it even after knowing all of this, that's totally your prerogative and I wouldn't even blame you. Just as long as you get both sides, right? Just like the show says. So, final conclusion, did I think this show was great? Not really. Did I hate it and think it was trash? That's another no. I think this show was okay, and it did a lot of things well, but kind of got a little too ambitious, and as a result, ended up sacrificing other parts of itself. Look, I'll probably have to process a lot more, and I'm sure after this I'll comment and share my opinion after thinking about it for a while, but this was my raw reaction off the cuff. Will I watch season 2? Sure. I mean, I could use the views. I could always use the views. So if that's what you want to see, then let me know. But let me end this rant here. Enough of me talking. It's time for you to get typing. What did you think about this show? Are you going to watch season 2? What do you think is going to happen in season 2? Let me know and let the discussion commence. Once again, just want to thank everyone for watching with me, even through the tough parts. It was fun to just talk with you guys and read your thoughts every week. Anyways, this is 210 East, and I'll see you guys next time.